Hey, welcome to the process. My name is Dr. John Bush. This is lesson 110. We are winding down our look at ADP versus end of the season results. We've had 10 lessons now, and I think you should start, if you haven't, go back and look a couple times. Start getting in your head almost a visceral way when you go through round by round in your redraft leagues and whatever that what the value could be of the players you're picking on average. Of course, if your fantasy diary shows that you're good early or middle or late drafts, then proceed that way. But right now, if you don't have an idea, the best is to at least understand and have the average as a reference forecasting point. And please see that lesson, reference class forecasting, give you an idea there. But anyway, does the ADP predict end of the season results? I think the answer is yes and no. It's not 100% perfect, but it's not 100% imperfect either. So depending on the position, the period in the draft, and what's going on, you can rely more on certain blocks, sectors, positions than on others. So you'll have to understand that and at least know that you're, stepping in a minefield a little bit. Half the battle is just knowing when you have arrived at such a risky, I should say, a place of uncertainty. Okay, so I got to review that risk versus uncertainty. Please go see that lesson. It's hard for me to break that, but the risk and uncertainty are actually two different things, and most people, myself until the last few years, didn't really understand that. Shh, it's my dog. And so anyway, let's continue. Shh. Okay, let's go to slide 2. Okay, we, like I said, are at the end, and now we are going to look at a statistical metric called standard deviation, which is an approximation for the uncertainty. Uh, it's not exactly mathematically, there are more sophisticated ways, but this is a proxy that I think we'll use. It's built into Excel, and it's just something you could quickly get a handle on. And again, it is the deviation from the average in a population. So the higher the standard deviation, the more variation, and probably the higher uncertainty, right? So we've started out by position. So we've got quarterback there, the ADP sector. And again, this is from, what was it, 2015 to 2021. So I think a 7-year window. So I looked across 7 years, combined that data, and then broke it into sectors, the preseason ADP sectors. So when it says 13th to 18th picks, that is the ADP at that point, position quarterback. The average of the standard deviation across that 7 years, 4.1. So you can see on the whole, the level of uncertainty for quarterbacks, for the most part, is lowest to about, I know I see the 7.5 here, but pretty much to the 42nd pick. So early on in your quarterback drafting in sectors. So the earlier quarterbacks, the later quarterbacks or the mid-pick quarterbacks, you're not too bad on the variation. And then about the 73rd, so about what is that? Is that six rounds? So after the sixth round, and maybe right to the sixth round, you're starting to see something in the eights and nines, and certainly it gets to the 11s, 13s, and 16s. So it really starts increasing. So the number of mines in the minefield really start going up at this point. So that's the nature of the quarterbacks. Tight ends, we see that we start a sector early because people on occasion over the 7 years have picked some early tight ends, usually Kelsey and maybe Gronk years ago. And the variation or the standard deviation was really low until after the 30th pick. So you're fairly safe on variation. That even better than quarterbacks. So I think what that says is that the early tight ends tend to be what we think they are as far as the end of the season. So let me go back and just state that the standard deviation calculated not on the ADP averages, but on the end of the season PPR, end of the season PPR points. We can argue about how good that is, but it's a standard, and that's what I'm using here. So there are some foibles to using that. But anyway, I think we can safely say that the tight ends are who you think they are. The question I think, and I think you'll have to consider, is if you take an early tight end, what penalty are you going to receive when you look at your team in total? In other words, missing on key wide receivers and running backs may be hard to catch up with a tight end. So that's always been the debate there. Zero RB, zero WR, early QB, late QB, early tight end, late tight end type of drafting. So you've got to figure, and usually your diary can let you figure that. So we have another sector of uncertainty going to about the 66th pick. And notice with quarterbacks, we're still higher. So tight ends, even deeper into the draft, are not too bad. Only close to the sixth round, isn't that interesting? Sixth round, things start really starting to shake out. And fairly quickly, the tight ends get to be wacky packages here, even exceeding the quarterbacks as far as uncertainty levels. So it's not like the milk that expires and you could drink it a day or two after. This goes bad quick after a certain amount. So quarterbacks are a little more gradual on uncertainty. Tight ends really start expiring certainly by the 84th pick here. So that's when I said in your head, you need to do some mocks and have this data, write it down, and just consider if you're picking your tight end, do you want to wait where there's a lot of chances of you blowing up or not? There's pros and cons to that, and your fantasy diary, is the answer for your personal approaches. And if you haven't done a fantasy diary, please start, write down your picks, what the result was, did you win the league? Did you come in last? What happened? And so, do you do redraft, superflex, dynasty, best ball? Where are you good? Where are you bad? What positions? All that is part of your fantasy diary there. But I'm just telling you where the minefield gets really thick. The weeds get thick starting at the 85th pick. for tight ends. So it's really, if you've waited that long, boy, you better know exactly what you're picking out. You better be really good at that if that's your first tight end. Okay, so that is what we're seeing there. And let's move to the next slide. So this is just plotting with a bar graph to actually visually see these tabular metrics. To me, I like to see it so I can believe it and think about it, okay, and inspires questions. So the trend line smooths out the data. So, there's some is high, some is low, but this is the trend, and it's a gentle rise of quarterback uncertainty, probably about, what did I say, 84th somewhere, and it really picks up here late. And then the tight end, notice the acceleration of uncertainty really takes off at the 85th, or even before that. You're really on a roller coaster here. And if you're, picking your first tight end in here, the level of uncertainty is high. And if your strategy is to do that, I would hope that you have something of past performances that you're good at doing that. Because if you're not, I would say, it might be better. In fact, look at your previous results. Had it been better for you to take a tight end early? In other words, what did you gain in a weekly way? Kind of turn the tables. If I picked one early instead of late, how many points did I gain versus how many did I lose skipping a good tight end or wide receiver? So you need to try to work that out in your head. This is not something you figure out during your redraft or, six-pack in to your high money redraft, okay? Or dynasty. No. Okay, you party after the season when you collect your checks. That's when you party, and then you sober up the next day and get back to work on fantasy football, right? Fantasy football players take a few days off out of the year to recharge, and then they go. We are not civilians or the military, right? So we don't get a lot of the, or the government workers and sit back all the time. We get to work. Every day is a new day and an opportunity. So a few days to charge your battery in January, then get back to work. And that's that. Okay, so hopefully I pepped your talk there. Okay, so now RB versus WR. And what's interesting is early on in the running backs, notice the level of uncertainty. Probably this probably surprises people, but we have low uncertainty compared to quarterbacks and tight ends to about the 30th pick. So that's really nice. And even to the 42nd pick, it's not bad. And it really starts getting hinky about the 79th pick. Starts getting really crazy at that point. Hate allergies. Okay, so it starts getting a little wacky here and things really accelerate. So if you're one of those, I can pick that sleeper. Most likely you don't pick sleepers, and in fact you're blowing up. So don't fool yourself. Unless your diary says otherwise, more likely than not, your so-called sleepers are duds. Sorry. So you better work hard if that's what you're relying on there. So the 0 RB, if you end up skipping some of these so-called, in some ways, sitting ducks, They're almost who, for the most part, who you think they are as far as uncertainty. Yeah, there's going to be some, injuries and things. And we've seen in the other lessons the pros and cons of the different sectors and at the end of the season. But as far as the level of uncertainty, we get a big advantage in the first 30 picks there. So you should use that. And if you elect to be, then think about it. Here's round one, round two. So if you're 0 RB and you skipped the first two rounds, most likely you're not picking in the third round. 0 RB is usually quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, and usually you do four of that, right? So you do a quarterback, a tight end, and two wide receivers, something to that mix. So you're down here before you're picking an RB, and notice you've doubled potentially your uncertainty. So you're trading safety for more uncertainty with the 0 RB on average. You're saying, well, Dr. Bush, I've done, this, that, and the other. Well, if you've done it and your diary says it, then, don't, just don't follow me. Do what your diary says works for you. But if it's not working for you, then you want to look at my lessons and think about things. Okay, so I think we're getting the second tier of uncertainty. Then by the 97th pick, we're really starting to skyrocket here. And we're in no man's land about this point here at the 133rd pick. It's really pretty much you're shooting blanks at that point. Okay, wide receivers. What about uncertainty? Same kind of story. The first 30 picks, we're doing well, actually. So, again, a lot of people will grab a running back and an RB. That or a wide receiver and an RB. Either way you go and you're staying in the first couple rounds, you're getting the best you can get as far as uncertainty in your picks. So those are reasonable and I think a balanced approach. But again, you need to see what your diary says about that. And notice that the levels of the WRs stay pretty good into the 60th pick here. So fifth round, we're still enjoying a nice selection here. So a lot of people will pick two RBs and then know that they're fishing in this world and their uncertainty levels are still fairly good. So I think, probably past experience has led a lot of people to go this route. That if you use the uncertainty levels as a guide, that would make sense. So it really starts getting crazy about the 91st pick, and you're starting to go up, but not as dramatic as the RBs late. Okay, it's better, I think, in some ways, as far as uncertainty, to fish for later WRs than the RBs per se, unless you need a handcuff kind of thing. So what does the graph look like for these? Here is the RBs, and notice the levels here are really nice. Here's the first 30 picks. You're below 5 here. Nice. It does pick up, and it kind of plateaus about the 91st, and then it takes off again. So just realize you kind of have this. It's going up, kind of the next tier. We kind of have this next tier, third tier, and then it's really spiking at this point. So it would be foolish to think picks in here have the same uncertainty as down here. It's just not the case. Don't fool yourself and, somehow think you're going to be better than average on all your picks. I mean, unless your diary says so, this is kind of the trend that holds for average picking here of the RBs. WRs, let's see if I can move to that. It's just W. Oh, here it is. So we enjoy, here's 5 here, and we're going 5 even to the 48th pick. So if we use 5 as our standard deviation level for safety, then you have a lot more leeway for the WRs in picking your a level of uncertainty. And it kind of goes up, and it really never just hits a plateau. It just keeps going, but it's a gentle curve here. And so you're thinking, well, how does that compare to WRs versus RBs? And I think you have to plot both of them together to get the true view. And here it is for you. Yellow trend line is running backs, and red trend line is wide receivers. So uncertainty clearly would favor later in the draft, certainly WRs, okay, versus RBs. Unless your diary says different and you don't really, it's like, well, these two over here look interesting, but here's a running back that looks interesting. Here's a wide receiver. Tiebreakers probably will go to the wide receivers unless you need some type of handcuff situation, which is legitimate, and I do that. And if you have a deep bench, then, do that. But if you have a shallow bench, the tiebreaker here, using uncertainty as your tiebreaker, is going to lean to the wide receivers. And I think this is a nice graph here and pretty much shows the divergence by about the 42nd pick. And it stayed, notice the difference is about the same, and it starts getting wide about the 120th pick, and it starts really diverging at that point. So it's not costing you anything more or less picking an RB later versus earlier until after about the 120. Then it's really starting to cost you, and you're getting a higher difference here, and certainly late in the draft as well. So just, consider that. Let's see what we got. Okay, this slide is where we're looking at all the positions, their end of the season standard deviation, all combined. And this pretty much sings the song that the further you go in the draft, the higher the uncertainty level. So you just need to kind of deal with that and let it kind of marinate on your system here. And it really gets wacky probably after the 11th or 12th round here. So you just need to understand you're in the minefield at that point. Okay, so we've kind of discussed the uncertainty, and I think you've got an idea. You can look at the averages of the uncertainty for the positions and kind of think about how that works with your style of play, right? So the last thing I'm going to do is kind of a little bit different, but kind of circling back. What you see now is the ADP sector, the position, and the average end of the season PPR points per week, okay, per week. And this is a 7-year average. And I have the ADP sector, and I color coded if you had a draft pick, 1st to 6th, where you would pick again, like 6 through 1 and 1 through 6 again. So if you did a snake draft kind of thing. And so then I use this as a basis to simulate then a couple patterns, and I thought you should just see the results of those patterns, and you'll get what I mean here in a second. So, pattern one is if you're the first two picks are RB, RB, second two picks was third and fourth would be WR, WR, and then a tight end and a quarterback in that order. And so here's the draft pick if you were 1 to 6 where you would pick, okay, and the average points per week that you should get or expect on average by picking in this pattern. And so if you had a draft pick 1 to 6 and you follow this pattern out, and that was you only pick 6 players on your team, okay, you should average in the week 95.7 PPR points per week, if that's your pattern. If you're a 7th through 12th draft pick, you should only get back 92.9. So on average, when you get a later pick, you are losing, what is that, about 3 points per week that you've got to make up. So there's this idea that draft picks don't maybe mean as much. I don't know if anybody's done any kind of Monte Carlo simulations. That would be the next step, and I just don't have the time or the computational power of my laptop. You pretty much need a dedicated server and do millions of simulated picks and over probably a couple days worth of work to do it right. But I think there's an indication that you're losing 3 points. So I'm not sure I have necessarily a strategy to get over those 3 points. I think part of your fantasy diary should be to note where you picked and kind of how it ended up for you. But on average, it looks like that pattern, you're down about 3 points. So then I asked the question, what happens if you did RBWR, tight end, and quarterback, flipped it one way or the other. And again, the draft pick here, depending on what you got, this would have been your points per week. So what we ended up with was if you got 1st through 6, you got 94.8, and 7th through 12th, 91.1. So the first takeaway is taking an RBWR on average puts you about a point less per week than RBRB, on average. So if you don't have any opinions, this implies that the taking 2 running backs is better than trying to split it up like that. And these are the only 2 patterns that I tested. I just wanted you guys to see that deeper level thinking that you might develop for yourself. Get your database there. But right now, I don't know, I hadn't seen anything free where people simulate draft picks and advantages or disadvantages. But that's what it shows me, that, running back early is better than splitting it anyway. And I don't think wide receiver, running back is even better. I think that's even worse on average. And again, this is on average across 7 years. Lots of, people and variations. So this is not in stone. This is just a guide to really make you think about it, and I would propose that in your mock drafts and in your draft plans, how are you going to handle early versus late pick? How are you going to approach that? That is the purpose of me going through that, is just to inspire deeper thinking and research for your activities there. So anyway, that's I think I'm all that I'm going to talk about here for this subject. So I think we're going to move on to other subjects in my lesson plans coming up, but I wanted to finish it out with, again, uncertainty and just a little bit about modeling. I've never seen any modelers out there that have produced data. I'm sure they're maybe out there, but they hadn't published, or maybe they're behind paywalls and I hadn't seen it. Certainly hadn't seen any on Twitter, and I'm not going to publish. If you do follow me on Twitter, I really am not interested in actually wasted my time throwing that out there. I'm going to let others do that and frolic and chew on each other and carry on. That's just not what I'm doing. I would rather spend my time off Twitter and Facebook and try to think about what I need to do and take care of my business. And I would urge you to do the same. And the last thing to say, and it applies to me as well, that if you're going to take advice, it's probably best to not take advice from people that there's no penalty if they're wrong out there. In other words, all these pundits that are on Twitter and Facebook, people don't remember what they said in March versus August unless these same people pull up, oh, look what I said back in March. Well, what else did you say in March that you're not telling me about? In other words, you don't see the losers. They're already going to show you the winners. And you're saying, well, why don't you do that? That's a way. Why do I care if you believe me or not? Part of my lesson plan is to inspire you, okay, to do fantasy diary, to think, go do research. It's not to sit on top of the hill and, plant my flag and run around saying I'm the best dog ever. That's a waste of time. And being a scientist, that is not how that I've seen most scientists behave at all. Very rarely. It's almost cartoonish. If there was a scientist doing that, you'd be like, come on, man. Are you, because we know in science that everything you think and understand means that you just haven't been proven false yet. So every conjecture in science exists until it's proven false. And as you know, with new technology and new findings, things are proven false and new ideas take their place. So for anybody to get up and say, this is it, no more research, it's done, that is not how science works, and that's not how I approach my fantasy football scholarship at all. Okay, so that's just why you don't see me on Twitter. Let me tell you how good I am. Hey, that's up to you. You need to figure it out. I would rather inspire you to do your own research than for you to blindly listen to me or anybody else. I enjoy the research side of it. I enjoy learning and doing my own thing. So that gets my enjoyment to do that. That's the kind of person I am, and that's what inspires me. Not that, 10 people give me a like on my Twitter that I was right back in January about an issue. I don't care. And frankly, if people care, then I'm not sure I'd be paying attention to them. And by the way, there's no penalty for me being wrong either. I'm going to keep talking about things. And when I talk about averages, I understand what that means. There always are extremes and exceptions. And extreme data points actually are an opportunity to figure out what's going on. Maybe we don't understand a process like we thought. So it's when somebody says, oh, wow, you're really off. That's like, yeah, why was I really off? And you go back and you look at that. So that actually people should say, boy, I really sucked here. And I went back and spent X amount of hours studying that, and this is what I think I missed. And then see what happens, and then, go from there. So keep on that iteration. So please come back, but I thought you should hear some of my philosophy a little bit about research and whatnot. Okay, we're having fun. This is Dr. Bush for The Process, signing off.